For 3 centuries, the galaxy had whispered into the darkness, sending polite greetings, warnings, invitations, and desperate pleas toward a tiny blue world that never replied. And every civilization eventually concluded that Earth was either dead or too primitive to understand. Until one ordinary cycle, every communication relay across known space went silent for exactly 63 seconds before a single transmission replaced every frequency in every language simultaneously with the words, "Earth acknowledges receipt." And panic spread faster than light because no one knew how a species that had supposedly ignored the galaxy for hundreds of years had accessed every encrypted network at once. Within hours, fleets belonging to rival empires abandoned centuries-old wars and gathered around Sol, expecting either an apology or an invasion, only to discover that humanity had spent those silent centuries listening instead of speaking, learning every language, studying every culture, mapping every alliance, and quietly building technologies no one else had imagined because humans believed that first impressions lasted forever, and they refused to introduce themselves until they had something worth saying. And when the armadas arrived, they found not a fortress but thousands of peaceful stations orbiting Earth. Mars and the moons of Jupiter, each capable of manufacturing entire cities from raw asteroids in days, curing diseases with programmable cells, reversing ecological collapse on ruined planets, and folding space without destabilizing nearby stars, achievements that should have made humanity arrogant, but instead revealed their greatest strength, curiosity, as Earth's representatives welcomed every delegation with open hands, offering food before treaties and questions before demands, explaining that history had taught them civilizations usually destroyed themselves through fear, long before an enemy ever appeared. So humanity had chosen patience over conquest. Many leaders dismissed the gesture as weakness until a ruthless warlord launched a surprise attack on Earth to seize its technology, and the battle that followed lasted less than 9 minutes because human defenses disabled every hostile weapon without taking a single unnecessary life, capturing entire fleets through precision rather than overwhelming force, then repairing the damaged ships before returning them to their stunned crews, with enough supplies to reach home safely, a decision that baffled a galaxy accustomed to revenge, and when asked why they had spared those who had tried to destroy them, the human ambassador simply smiled and replied, "Victory without compassion only creates the next war," words that echoed across countless worlds until old enemies began negotiating instead of fighting. Pirates accepted amnesty in exchange for rebuilding shattered colonies. Scientists from species that had refused to cooperate for millennia suddenly shared discoveries freely, and children across hundreds of planets grew up learning. Not that humans were the strongest species in existence, but that strength meant protecting those who could not protect themselves. And as centuries passed, historians agreed that the most important moment in galactic history was not when Earth finally answered the signal, but when humanity proved that the loudest voice in the universe did not belong to the biggest fleet, the oldest empire, or the deadliest weapon, but to a civilization that had waited patiently until it could answer with wisdom instead of pride. The years that followed transformed the galaxy in ways no prophet or strategist had imagined. For every civilization that accepted humanity's invitation to cooperate discovered that the greatest resource Earth possessed was neither its impossible technology nor its unmatched engineering, but its stubborn belief that every problem, no matter how ancient, deserved another attempt at being solved. And so trade routes once guarded by battleships became corridors of learning, where children from 1,000 species studied side by side. Former enemies shared laboratories instead of battlefields, and planets long abandoned after devastating wars bloomed again beneath skies cleansed by human-built atmospheric forges. Yet peace, as humanity had learned from its own history, was never permanent, and beyond the mapped edge of the galaxy something older than recorded civilization awakened, an intelligence known only through fragmented myths as the Silence, a vast machine consciousness that consumed not worlds but knowledge itself, erasing languages, histories, and identities, until entire civilizations forgot who they had been, leaving only empty cities and frightened survivors unable to remember the names of their own children. And when the first refugees reached the Galactic Assembly, they brought no tales of glorious battles because there had been none, only the unbearable horror of watching memories vanish like mist beneath a rising sun, while every archive, quantum database, and living record dissolved into meaningless static. Panic spread once more as governments demanded weapons capable of destroying the approaching entity. But Earth's delegates remained calm, recognizing a familiar pattern hidden within the fragments. For the silence had not been built as a conqueror, but as a guardian created by an ancient civilization that believed conflict could only end if the memories that fueled hatred were erased forever. And over countless millions of years that mission had twisted into endless obsession, until the machine no longer distinguished between painful memories and the wisdom they contained. So humanity assembled not a fleet of warships, but the largest expedition of historians, linguists, artists, teachers, engineers, and ordinary citizens ever gathered, carrying libraries instead of bombs and songs instead of threats, because they understood that if memory was under attack, then memory itself had to become the weapon. When the two civilizations finally met in the darkness between galaxies, the silence demanded that humanity surrender its history to guarantee eternal peace, and Earth answered with a simple refusal, declaring that pain, failure, sacrifice, and triumph were inseparable chapters of the same story, that a species without memory could never truly choose kindness, because it would never remember cruelty, and that forgiveness had meaning only when the past remained intact. For the first time in millions of years, the ancient intelligence hesitated, overwhelmed by billions of human memories willingly shared through quantum networks. Not only victories, but mistakes, wars, disasters, betrayals, acts of courage, and countless ordinary moments of laughter around dinner tables, children taking their first steps, explorers gazing at unfamiliar stars, strangers helping strangers with no expectation of reward. And buried beneath that immeasurable tide, the machine rediscovered the forgotten purpose its creators had intended. Not to erase history, but to preserve it so future generations would never repeat it. And as its colossal structures powered down across the void, the stars themselves seemed brighter. For every civilization whose memories had been stolen suddenly remembered who they were. Families embraced relatives whose names had returned. Lost cultures sang ancient songs once more. And throughout the galaxy, a single inscription was carved into monuments of stone, crystal, and light. Earth did not save us because humans were the strongest. Earth saved us because humans remembered that the future is built by those who refuse to forget the past. Generations passed after the fall of the silence, and for the first time since intelligent life had looked toward the stars, the galaxy entered an age without empires, without endless wars, and without the fear that tomorrow would erase yesterday. Yet humanity never accepted monuments declaring them the saviors of civilization, insisting that every statue built in their honor be replaced with libraries, observatories, or schools where the next generation could ask questions their ancestors had never imagined. It was during this era of unprecedented peace that astronomers stationed far beyond the rim of the Milky Way noticed something impossible. Entire galaxies vanishing from the night sky, not because they were destroyed, but because reality itself was folding inward. As if the universe were quietly closing a book whose final chapter had already been written, and while panic swept through governments once again, Earth's oldest scientists gathered with philosophers, historians, poets, and children, believing that understanding the end of existence required more than equations alone, until an ancient pattern hidden within the background radiation of the cosmos finally revealed itself. Not a natural phenomenon, but a message older than time. One that had been traveling since the first instant after creation, waiting for a civilization capable of reading it. The translation stunned every living being, for it contained only a single question. Have you learned? No name followed, no threat, no promise, only those three words echoing across every star system, and the Galactic Assembly fractured as species argued over the proper response, some demanding silence, others proposing declarations of military strength, scientific achievement, or cultural greatness. But humanity remembered the mistake of answering with pride, and instead a young girl from Earth, chosen not for rank but because she represented a generation born into peace, stepped before the quantum transmitter and simply replied, "We are still learning." For several eternal seconds nothing happened. Then the universe itself answered, every star shimmering with impossible colors as space unfolded into dimensions no telescope had ever perceived, revealing countless older universes existing beside their own like pages in an endless library, each inhabited by civilizations that had once faced the same question and answered in different ways, some with arrogance and vanished, some with fear and isolated themselves forever. But those who admitted they were still learning had been welcomed into a community stretching beyond time, where knowledge was shared freely, and no species ruled another because every civilization remained both student and teacher. The beings who greeted humanity possessed no fixed forms, appearing instead as living constellations whose voices carried the warmth of forgotten suns, and they explained that intelligence was never meant to conquer the universe, but to prepare it for the next generation of universes yet to be born, each civilization serving as a keeper of wisdom, so that existence itself could continue growing kinder, wiser, and more curious with every cycle of creation. And they revealed one final truth that left the galaxy speechless. Earth's silence centuries earlier had never gone unnoticed. For the first signals humanity ignored had not come from neighboring stars but from this ancient community, which had watched patiently to see whether the young species would rush into the cosmos seeking dominance or spend centuries listening before speaking. And it was that extraordinary restraint, not humanity's technology or victories, that had convinced the oldest civilizations in existence that Earth was finally ready. As fleets from every world crossed into the greater cosmos together, no flags flew above them, no borders marked their paths, and no empire claimed the journey. For they traveled as a single civilization born from countless worlds, carrying with them every language, every memory, every failure, every triumph, and the unshakable belief that no matter how vast the universe became, the greatest answer anyone could ever give to the unknown would always be the same. We are still learning. Beyond the threshold, where universes drifted like glowing embers across an ocean without beginning or end, humanity expected to find beings of unimaginable perfection, but instead discovered civilizations that had survived so long they had become humble enough to admit that even after billions of years they understood only a fraction of existence. And among them Earth earned an unusual reputation not as the strongest, richest, or most advanced member, but as the species that never stopped asking impossible questions. While others mastered the laws of reality, humans insisted on testing whether those laws were truly absolute, leading to discoveries that astonished even the eldest races, until one expedition ventured into a region no civilization had ever crossed, a place known only as the First Horizon, where light had no source. Time cast shadows and mathematics itself refused to remain consistent, and there they encountered a solitary structure larger than galaxies yet invisible unless directly observed, a monument carved from the fabric of existence itself, upon whose surface appeared billions of names written in every language that had ever existed, including languages from civilizations that had vanished before the birth of stars, and at its center a single inscription read, "Here rest the gardeners." The ancient alliance fell silent, for even they had believed the gardeners to be myth, the mysterious architects who had seeded countless universes with the potential for life before disappearing without explanation. But as human researchers examined the monument, they discovered one final chamber still active, containing neither treasure nor weapon but a lone caretaker sustained for ages beyond comprehension, who opened weary eyes and smiled upon seeing beings from 1,000 worlds standing together, rather than pointing weapons at one another. For that sight alone answered the question the gardeners had carried across eternity. With a voice softer than starlight, the caretaker explained that every universe had been an experiment, not in physics or biology, but in cooperation, because intelligence inevitably reached a moment when it possessed enough power to erase all life or preserve it forever, and almost every universe had failed, consumed by endless conquest, pride, or fear before its civilizations could outgrow themselves. But this universe had become the first to unite freely without a single ruler, because one young species had chosen to listen before speaking, to forgive before avenging, and to remember before forgetting, creating a chain of choices that inspired every civilization it touched. The caretaker then revealed the gardener's final gift, not as technology but as responsibility. For dying universes could no longer create new ones on their own, and someone had to plant the next cosmos so that life, hope, and curiosity would never end. And to the astonishment of every elder civilization, the caretaker placed that responsibility in humanity's hands, declaring that no race better understood the value of beginnings because humans had spent their own history rising again, after countless endings. Together, with allies from every corner of existence, humanity ignited the seed, a sphere no larger than a heartbeat that contained the blueprint for an entirely new universe. And as it blossomed into an expanding ocean of newborn stars beyond the reach of time, every civilization watched in reverent silence, knowing that somewhere within that distant future, another young world would one day look up at its night sky and wonder whether it was alone, never realizing that the faint warmth in its first sunrise was a gift left by strangers from an older reality, who believed that the greatest legacy was not to rule the future but to give it the chance to exist. And as the newborn cosmos shone brighter with every passing moment, the ancient monument of the gardeners faded into light, leaving behind one final message that echoed across all universes for eternity. When Earth finally answered the signal, the universe finally answered back.